good afternoon or good morning, whatever it is. I would like to speak to the rebirth in the use of myth to assist urban adolescent males in their development, and also the use of myth, the rebirth and the use of myth and fairy tales, mythological stories and fairy tales to assist urban adolescent males in becoming the hero within their own stories. So obviously, the use of myth is not my idea, because using myth to assist youth in their life has been around since the beginning of time. And pretty much your traditional cultures, they use myth all the time to assist youth in their development. Now, my personal introduction to myth came when I was a counselor at the University of Akron, and I was counseling high school students, and it was like pulling teeth getting them to talk. And I came across the book Men in the Water of Life by Michael Meade. And in this book, it was 7 different mythological stories. And from reading those myths, basically what he would do, he would tell you a myth, and then he would give you an interpretation of the myth. So from that, I just learned a lot about myself, and I said, wow, this is the ticket in working with adolescent males. So what I started to do was use myth with the males, and then also running the parent workshops, because what I found was that when you tell someone a story or a myth, it removes them from the situation, and they can look at the situation objectively. So it was actually 3 incidents that really told me that myth was the ticket. One was when I was working with high school dropouts in Akron, and I had 3 separate groups. And when I first started, it was just like 4 in a group. By the end of the year, we had like 20 in each group, and we were telling the myth of the water of life. And in this myth, the king is sick, and when the king is sick, the entire village is sick. And the king's sons, his 3 sons, they were crying. They were sitting on the castle steps crying. And so an old man walked by and he saw them crying. So he asked, why were they crying? They said, we're crying because our father, the king, is sick. So these young men, in the last week we were together, and I think we probably were together about 15 to 20 weeks. And the last week, just from that myth right there, these high school dropouts, which is a tough crowd to engage, they took it upon themselves through that mythological story to go around the circle one by one and talk about the last time they cried. And I was just like, wow, this myth is the ticket. I was up in Cleveland working with high school dropouts, had 3 separate groups. And in Cleveland, what they were trying to do, they were trying to make sure they got their money's worth out of me. So they would give me 33 at a time. So I had 3 separate groups with 33 high school dropouts from Cleveland, Ohio. And I had them for an hour and a half, and I just found that I wasn't getting a lot done. So what I decided to do, I told them I would give them the first 15 minutes. They could do whatever they wanted to do. If they just gave me an hour, and they could have the last 15 minutes. So I told them they could do whatever. So what they did was during that 15 minutes, in the beginning and the end, they would just play music. They would freestyle, which is like rap. Back then, freaking their black and milds, where you would take the cigar and take the ashes out, or tobacco out. And then they would roast one another. It was chaos. It was chaos. But I was fine with it because they would give me my hour. And then I noticed in one of those periods of chaos, it was a young brother from South Central Los Angeles. He hollered out. During their moment of chaos, he hollered out, Kwame, tell us another story. And I just said, wow, this myth is the ticket. So from that, I left the University of Akron. I worked at Goodyear Tire Rubber Company 15 years. And trust me when I tell you, I am not the corporate type. And I left Goodyear. Really didn't know what I was going to do. I ended up getting a graduate assistantship. Didn't even know what a graduate assistantship was, because it took me 15 years to graduate, because I worked during the day and went to school in the evening. And ended up getting a graduate assistantship. Took that. And then that's when I was working at University of Akron. And so during my time there, that was when I was working with the students. So after I really found about the use of myth and how that was really a very good tool in in engaging males, I started the nonprofit Alchemy. I think I started that in 2003. So the images that you see of the young men on the screen is from that program where we started with them actually in 2004. And they were 6th graders. It was just supposed to be a 3-year program. We ended up keeping them for 7 years, so they just graduated last year from high school. We have our core group of 30. 15 was from the youth at Perkins, started 6th grade. The other 15 were 9th graders that we started with at Copley High School, and it was only supposed to be a 10-week program. And in week 8, one of the boys hollered out, "Kwame, we should have this longer." So I whispered to my other friend who I worked with, and I asked him, was he okay if we worked with them to the end of their 9th grade year, whether we got paid or not? And he said, yes, so I informed him of that. Then about 10 seconds later, I asked him, was he okay if we stayed with them till they graduated, whether we got paid or not? So we've been within a 10-week program, turned out to be 4 years. So thank you very much. So we ended up having our core group for 4 to 7 years, and it's a core group pretty much of 30 males. 28 out of 30 graduated on time, with 26 out of 28 enrolling in college, and they're in their first year of college now. Thank you to them. Thank you to them. Beautiful group, beautiful group. We're going to follow them through their 4 years of college, whereas before we used to meet twice a week after school, and then in a high school program was in-school program for like 20 weeks. And then when they went off to different high schools, we would meet once a month for 4 hours once a month. But now that they're all in college, we'll just meet during the fall break and in the summer for like 4 or 5 hours. We're fortunate because we're the topic of a documentary, film documentary, from an award-winning filmmaker out of San Francisco. She's going to follow him for another 2 years or so. So the documentary should come out in about 2 years. It's called Finding the Gold. So through my study of myth, basically here again, it's not my idea. What I took was the ideas of Carl Jung and his concept of the collective unconscious, where we all share a similar psyche. So I took those concepts, and I took the concepts of Joseph Campbell and his study of comparative myths. And basically what you'll find is that myths in Africa, Asia, Europe, Japan, China, they all say the same thing, because we all are going through similar things in our developmental stage as we go from the known to the unknown. So with Alchemy, the concept of our program is to create a safe environment and a sense of community to assist in the development of urban adolescent males through the telling, discussion, and analysis of mythological stories and fairy tales told to the beat of an African drum. We've worked with over 1,000 youth since our inception in a group setting, so we normally have them from about 10 to 20 weeks normally. So we're looking for a new core group right now that we will perhaps work with for 3 to another 7 years. So that's pretty much the theoretical background of how I came about using myth to engage urban adolescent males. They say that neither thought nor action in and of itself is sufficient. The one must be accompanied by the other. So what I want to do is just show you the practical application of myth. And what I'll do is tell you a story and just show you how, through the myth, we engage our males. Now, the actual theoretical foundation of alchemy is the work of Carl Jung, Joseph Campbell, and the Khan system of life cycle development, which is an African-based rites of passage. We also utilize a lot of journal writing. These boys, and when I call them boys, I mean that in a term of endearment. They all have journals, and they write down in their journals what resonates with them in the myths. We'll have about 20 to 30 questions for each myth. And we'll go around the circle one by one, and they'll say what resonated with them. No right or wrong answers, merely for discussion's sake. Now, alchemy itself is the ancient art of transformation where the alchemists thought they could take a base metal and put it through a process and extract gold out of it. Now, this base metal they called a prima materia. And it was a base metal, a substance which many thought was of little or no value. But the alchemists thought that if you worked with that base substance, it would become of immense value. We use that as a metaphor in working with urban black males. Urban males, period, really. For society has, generally speaking, thrown them away unless they can play basketball or football. So we use that as a metaphor in trying to extract the best out of them. So here we go with a myth. They say that myths are false on the outside, but true on the inside. They're stories that have never been, but will always be. They're not just for putting children to sleep, but for waking adults up. They say that when you give a person facts and ideas, you enlighten their minds. But when you tell them a story, you touch their souls. Long, long ago, in what they called the Golden Age, it was a time when everything was created with a sense of enchantment, a sense of wonderment, a sense of beauty. It was a time when all the gods and goddesses and all the heroes and the sheroes, they walked amongst the earth with men and women. It was a glorious time, a beautiful time. But then it happened one day, and like we tell our youth, it only takes one day to change the rest of your life. On this one day, evil came into the world. And when evil came into the world, all the gods and goddesses and all the heroes and the sheroes, they went underground, never to be seen again. But it was said that they left traces of how it used to be. And when the children were fortunate enough to have these traces revealed to them, they once again remembered that golden time. And they would live in that life for some time. And they would only let go of it with great difficulty. So we're going to re-enter that golden age through the myth of the young giant. Once upon a time, in a time before we knew to name time, there lived a farmer, and he had a son. Now his son, he was a little fella. And when I say little, I mean that literally, for he was only as big as his father's thumb. And on one particular day, his father was about to go out to plow his fields, and his son said, "Father, may I go with you?" And the father said, "May you go with me?" The father said, "No, for you are far too small." He said, "Besides, if we go outside, with you being so small, perhaps just a mere gust of wind will send you away." Well, the little boy, he started to cry. But like we tell our boys, it's okay for boys to cry. For the soul would have no rainbow, had the eyes no tears. Well, the father, he got a little tired of the boy crying. So he put his son in his pocket and he walked to that field. And once he reached the field, he took the boy out of his pocket and he placed him in a freshly cut furrow. Well, just about that time, a giant was coming over the top of the hill. And the father, out of a sense of humor and trying to scare his son into making him behave, he said, "Look at that giant over there." He said, "He is coming to get you." Well, the giant, with a mere 2 steps, he was there in the furrow. And the giant, he picked up the little boy with his 2 fingers, and he examined the boy. And he walked away with that boy. Now the father, he stood there frozen in terror. And the only thing he could think about was that I will never see my son again. Now, the myth goes on, and it's a beautiful myth, I might add. But we stop right there, and we have the boys write down what resonates with them in the myth, with no right or wrong answers. That little portion right there, just that little portion, we spent 2 hours discussing the myth. So some of the questions, but before we get to the questions, we would ask the boys what resonates with them in the myth. So they go around one by one, and here again, there's no right or wrong answers because it's just to create discussion. So that there might take 30 minutes. That right there, 30, 40 minutes, because one young man will say something, another young man will say something else. So it's all about just creating discussion and trying to see the world in a different way, and trying to communicate with an open mind with one another. So some of the questions that we would take just from that little portion of a myth right there was when the father put the boy in his pocket and he walked to the field, then that boy was actually walking in the same rhythm as his father. So we asked the youth, how many of them want to walk in the same rhythm, in the same steps as their father? Well, that, needless to say, right there is going to bring up a number of issues. So just from that conversation there might have taken another 30, 40 minutes. Another question that would come from that myth right there, just that portion of the myth, was the son was put in that freshly cut furrow. So we asked them, are you being placed are you in a rut right now, or are you in a groove? We also asked them, just from that little piece right there, what is carrying you? What is carrying you? What gets you by day to day? What gets you by day to day? And then that's basically it. So here again, just from that little portion right there, we spent here again like 2 hours or so on myth. So there you go. That's it. Okay. All right. Thank you.